I want to learn Italian, but I don't know if I have enough time in my life to keep Italian and do all the job and do everything else as well. But being able to have that avatar of myself online who speaks Italian, has an, I don't know, an Italian YouTube channel or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
that would be freaking cool. Like,
Yeah, it's definitely going to the point where instant on the fly translation in your own voice should be very doable. Like I can talk to you and you're going to hear English, but I may only know Chinese, but it'll be my voice doing it. And you may speak to me and I'll hear it in Chinese and it'll
yeah.
be your voice in Chinese and it'll be like having a normal conversation. You wouldn't know the difference. Like
Actually,
it
you know what would be
feels
fun?
doable.
We've already had 2 episodes. We can translate the entire episode into, I don't know, Spanish or any of the other ones and see if people pick a difference between if it's actually us speaking versus
Oh,
the entire thing is just, oh,
hey,
these are just native Spanish speakers.
we should just translate it in 30 different languages.
Oh,
Do it at scale. If you're
yeah,
gonna do
yeah,
it, do it
basically.
at
Well,
scale.
that's
Yeah.
doable now, right? It's not that hard. All right. So the last episode we spoke about the LLM, and I guess because we still continue with the AI Primer series, we did the LLM conversation. We spoke about how the difference could like LLM based on tokenization and how we had an example of an apple tree, how that's mapped to a number.
Yep.
And depending on how I
Tokenized.
frame my prompt, it would say, oh, an apple number or an apple tree, what the number correlates to. The question I had was around the tokenization, where, say, the LLM system from Google versus the LLM system from Facebook versus someone else who comes with their own, the differentiation could be in the tokenization, but could be more than that as well. And I think that's where we landed on that. I don't know if you had any more.
We didn't get farther than that? Man, I
Yeah,
thought we got a lot farther
I know.
than
It was
that.
like, there's a lot of shit to cover in AI, man.
That's actually the very beginning stuff.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
haven't even got to the deployment part. So we were going to focus on the whole
Oh,
like
man.
to understand security for this. We need to understand. I feel at this point in time, 2 episodes down, we've covered what the AI as a space is. We've also covered what LLM, when people talk about LLM, what it is and what it does in the background. I think what we didn't get into was like before we can put the security filter onto it, like the deployment of it, like what does deployment look like. I think like
Okay.
is the model hosted, what's the validation layer and all of that. I think today we were going to do the deployment and enterprise. So what would be a deployment like for an LLM system? Maybe that's like a good place to start then.
So basically what I did is I created this, what you see here, this like marketecture kind
Yeah.
of thing where it's like, how do you view a very complex sort of deployment in something that's really simple? So it's just like boxed like a stack. And so what I did is if you start from the top going down, I start with a request coming in and obviously a response going out at an API level. So you have this model API. And so this is like any other API in text coming in or whatever data is coming in and data streaming out. And then you're going to want to have some sort of validation layer. And that validation layer is just ensuring that, hey, what you have coming in and what you do have going out are the things at which you expect. So a lot of places here, you're going to get what's the right structure of what I'm looking for. And also, this is where if you have some sort of LLM firewall, this is like a good spot where you're going to put this thing, right? Basically saying, I'm expecting this kind of things coming in and I'm going to block or make sure these are the things going out. The other aspect of this is once it gets past validation, you're going to go to a lower stack of orchestration layer. An orchestration layer is your air traffic controller. And that is this thing that says, okay, now that I've got a request, what am I going to do with it? So lots of places here that are very popular are things like LangChain, Llama Index, Guidance. These are like very popular orchestration layers that basically says, okay, now I'm going to do some things.
Yep.
And in this box, I've basically said there are three most common choices for this. You can take whatever comes in from the user. So let's just say, let's take a chat scenario. I'm going to take text from the user as a question. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to pass this directly to a model. So this can be your foundational model, obviously, OpenAI, Claude, whatever it happens to be, or it could be your custom model. And then you're going to get a response from that model and then you're going to format that in your orchestration layer and then pass it right back to the customer through your API. You could also decide and say, okay, as an orchestration layer, I'm going to take that request. I may pass it to a model and may say, hey, model, what is this user trying to do? And it may come back and says, hey, this user is trying to get data from HR or something similar to that. And it might decide, oh, I'm going to also make a request to, say, a vector database or an external data storage where now you get into this thing called RAG, this retrieval augmented, I forgot what the G is for, but it's basically short for going and grabbing data out of an external data store and then combining that together, passing it back to a model, summing it up, and then passing it back out the API to the user. You could also do something like pass it to an agent. So you're seeing today where all of these guys are allowing you to have internet access. So you can browse the internet or you can pass it to any sort of plugin if you're using ChatGPT. These are agents. And so I might go and then take that data and say, oh, I'm going to call an agent and then pass data to it, get the result, pass that to a model, and then pass it back to you. So this orchestration layer is this air traffic controller kind of makes these decisions. And underneath that, you've got your data layer. And so the data layer fundamentally, I think, is primarily used for two things. If you are actually doing your own enterprise data or personal data or augmented data, you're going to
Hmm.
want to go through a data pipeline. So you're going to want to ingest that data, clean that data, tokenize that data, and then shove that into a vector database, and or you might be fine tuning and or creating your own custom model. And so then that goes up the stack back into the model box. And so this, as a large overall picture, is my sort of simplistic LLM ops model. And so when you think about how is an LLM deployed, fundamentally all of these pieces are probably part of that. And also any of these pieces could be either hosted by you, custom made by you, or actually outsourced to some other service that does this, right? There are absolutely dedicated services that host your vector databases or your caches, or dedicated companies that do data ingestion and pipeline cleaning for you, or things that host your models, or things that do fine tuning for you, or things that host your APIs. All of those things are very open to being outsourced or consolidated in some sort of way.
Interesting. And I'll definitely encourage people who probably are listening to this in a podcast to watch the YouTube video as well so they can see the diagram. So you're saying that each one of those components that we are showing on the screen, that potentially could be, and because I'm thinking more from an enterprise, if I switch to the enterprise gear, what would this look like from an enterprise perspective?
I think it's the same, right? An enterprise, if you're hosting or using an LLM, by and large, these boxes correlate to most everything, right? So in an enterprise use case, you're talking, and I'm assuming when you're saying enterprise, you're like employees accessing an LLM.
Yeah,
Is that,
yeah, that's
yeah?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, same thing, except you're more than likely, if an employees are accessing your LLM, then you will probably have some external storage. So you are the popular thing to do today that's accepted is use vector databases. So you're going to need a data ingestion pipeline because you're going to want to pull in all of your data that goes into a vector database. So
Yeah.
you're going to want to say, hey, like in an enterprise, you probably want things like your Google Docs data, your Confluence pages, maybe your Jira tickets, maybe a documentation that you've got just spread throughout your enterprise. All that has to go through some sort of data pipeline, right? You've got to
Yeah. Yeah.
consolidate it, ingest it. You've got to clean it and prepare it in a way that an LLM can understand it. And then it goes through a tokenization and then generally gets shoved into a vector database. And then you're right in that box, right, of storage. And of course, now employees are the ones that are sending input to your API versus, let's say, customers.
And how different would it be for, say, consumers versus customers versus employee? Are we talking like different kinds of LLM systems? Now, if you zoom out a bit on the enterprise context and look at, so we spoke about the staff, the workforce, employees, because enterprise may have customers or consumers of their own, like third party that's trying to listen to them as well. How does that play a role in this?
Yeah, I think when I talk about deployment, I think of it's just what is the stack that is required in order to get an LLM to run, right?
Mhm.
And so what purpose it serves is really not really part of the equation. It can serve employees, it can serve customers. Obviously, in an enterprise deployment, customers may or may not be consumers, depending on what you're saying. And again, like this can also be deployed. Like today, you can use, say, Amazon AWS Bedrock,
Yeah.
and you could use their solution, which kind of helps with some of this stuff as well, where it actually takes the model, runs it at inference, has all of the things you need in order to basically get it running and operating. You can even use, I think Cloudflare announced their own version of you can host your own model and run whatever you want, and they'll host that deployment for you. There's a lot of different variations of this. But basically, it doesn't matter the purpose of what you're using. It's just if you're
Mm.
going to use an LLM, these are the fundamental Lego blocks.
Also, when say Amazon tells you to use Bedrock or Cloudflare saying that you can host your model and the LLM ops that we had, so they would say, hey, we can, that model box that is in your diagram, that's what they're saying they can basically host. You still would have to consider a vector database storage. You would still have to consider where am I storing my data for tokenization, ingestion, all of that as well.
Yeah, actually, I haven't dug too much into Bedrock yet. I believe like they're going to offer all that. Part of these things are just going to be part of that service. It's not just the hosting of the model in terms of just running it and inference, but it's actually probably going to be, hey, we're going to help you with your orchestration, vector databases. Agents might be a little bit different, but a lot of these I think will be hosted by these providers. They're going to, if they haven't already, they're going to head down the way that they're just going to have all of this because an enterprise wants turnkey. And at the end of the day, I should be able to go to AWS and or Cloudflare or whoever's offering this, even OpenAI, and basically say, check, this is my model. I want to fine tune that model. Can I fine tune
Yeah.
that model with your infrastructure? Oh, I'm going to use a vector database. Can I do that with your infrastructure? Oh, I need to ingest data and have the connectors to ingest that data and prep it. Okay, I'm just going to use your infrastructure.
Mm.
All of those things are just going to be provided.
Interesting. And I think too, it's funny, we on the last episode we spoke about the how the evolution of AI is going to happen as well, where at the moment, in a way, it's broadcasted with OpenAI, it's broadcasted with people can use Llama, and some enterprise like Shopify has already started using Llama internally or actually in their product as well. I also wonder from an enterprise perspective, as we add these components and maybe zooming out, there's a Bedrock, there's a Cloudflare, there's something else which is doing vector DB. There's something else doing something else. It feels like the threat matrix, if I think about this, it may look like a bit of a maze. So, what does threat look like in your mind? What's a good place to start? Because obviously, we are putting a cybersecurity lens on AI. I imagine a lot of people listening to this conversation, whether they're leaders or they're just practitioners trying to understand this. How does one start up thinking about threats in this?
Like, I think this infrastructure has been, I guess we're moving to that is also a little bit of a common ML pipeline, data
Mm.
pipeline infrastructure. Again, when you look at some of the threats, it's all variations depending on the attacks. So if we talk about something like prompt injection, for example, prompt injection becomes really dangerous when you have agents and plugins or when you are using vector databases or external storage. That's when I think prompt injection becomes a real problem. If you're talking about like data poisoning, for example, then it's going to be the data places that things become more dangerous or your fine tuning process where things become more dangerous. It all depends on the threat and the attack at which portion or which segment of the model really becomes a problem. I think overall, like today, if I were to talk to somebody today and they were like, okay, Caleb, at the end of the day, give me just like one or two things. That's all I really need to worry about, right? From a
Mm.
security perspective, I would say, hey, prompt injection, I think, is a real threat, right?
Mm.
And so I would say if you're doing any sort of agents or execution or you're doing external storage and vector databases, like you need to be careful of prompt injection. And you also, in your orchestration layer, I'd say number two is be careful about your permissioning, right? Like when you think about, hey, I'm going to go grab enterprise data from a secondary storage and pass it to an LLM and sum it up and throw it in there. What do the permissions look like? For example, do you have your LLM directly making the decision of what data to grab out of that secondary storage? Then what permission does that LLM have? Is it something overprivileged? Is it passing through the identity of the caller in
Yeah.
order to ensure that they're grabbing only data that is representative by what they can grab? So I think those are the two that I would say are probably the biggest concerns is, hey, you're going to have to build a good prompt to protect against prompt injection. You're going to have to be careful when you're doing execution in agents and when you're accessing external storage and really look at your privilege management in this. And make sure that it's not the LLM sort of making it the API call to your vector database, but the LLM is doing things like summarizing the data or let's say creating the kinds of data or categories you may want to go grab. but not directly making these calls. Those would really be the two top ones.
Yeah.
If someone were to push me for a third, I might say, "Are you fine-tuning things or you're ingesting data?" I would say, "Hey, make sure if you're building custom models or fine-tuning it, that you treat that as a secret." If you're gonna store that model file in a S3 bucket or some sort of data store, treat that as you would treat a secret, right? So, make sure it's secure, make sure it's only accessible by the right people at the right time,
Yeah.
with multiple factors of authentication to access and change that model. I would just state those things.
Maybe this was throw a span in the work. Now, when big data projects was becoming a thing, and one of the biggest challenge most people had was none of us had a data background. So everyone had to rely on data scientists who were always third party, who were always either contractors or consultants who had requirements to have access to data so they can build the algorithm, do the whatever they
Yep.
need to do with it. And as companies, your hands were tied because you didn't have the talent for it. So you have to give your data to someone else. And as you say that, I'm going, oh, actually, I don't know if it's like data confidentiality, yes, but where would be the balance between how much am I giving? Because I almost look at this as a trade secret as well. Like the same level of secrecy big data had for any prediction that might come from a big data project. Would you say the similar level of secrecy would be provided to LLM as well? In terms of as a security person, you're like, okay, the first layer to what you said is just am I comfortable with the data that's going to go into this in the first place? As an LLM model, what data are we going to put in? It's the same conversation people had with, oh, when cloud is not secure, okay, what data am I putting in? Am I putting protected, public, or what I think
Yes.
may be?
If I'm getting this right, what you're asking is, hey, before AI and LLMs even came around, like we already had this problem
That's
of,
correct.
yeah, ingesting in big data things that we probably shouldn't be ingesting, right? For
Yeah,
data
yeah,
scientists,
that's right.
you're 100%. It's the same thing. It's the same problem. So none of that has actually changed. It's not new. You're
Hmm.
basically, there are a lot of companies out there that focus on data security, data cleaning, a lot of these kinds of aspects that says in your data pipeline, I'm going to help you identify PII, clean out things that are bad. All of those are exactly the same thing that applies here.
Like even
Uh,
data discovery as well, because data spawning is a thing where I just happen to copy a data which I thought I'll delete later, but I never did. That's the
yes.
problem as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's some of the things that some of the changes that's pretty exciting, I think, that's coming up is people are like enterprises, for example, are shoving data into these vector databases for I think a couple of reasons. One, you don't have to like actually tune a model for this, right? You just
Yeah.
get the data you need. Two, it helps when there's new data. So as you refresh data, you can easily update it. And third, actually, certain vector databases now have permission models on them. So you can do things like carry over identity from the caller and be able to say, okay, only engineering teams can access engineering data. And it really does solve quite a few problems. And fine tuning is not really the place in a lot of cases where you're going to go and say, okay, I just need to fine tune my LLM for everything.
You know how a lot of the enterprise will be regulated as well? In the research that you've been doing, has there any signs of the auditors never, I won't say never, but there was a point when auditors would find it really hard to audit, say, cloud. Then there was a period where they were finding it really hard to audit data, and it all came down to as long as it what kind, you know what kind of data it is, I'm good. No questions asked about data spawning, data discovery, all of that. Have people started talking about, hey, I'm building an LLM system, I'm using it internally. Am I making it compliant to, I don't know, SOC 2 or ISO 27001? Is that, have you gone down to that level yet?
Yeah, NIST has produced a standard on this. Obviously, OWASP top 10
Yeah,
is
yeah,
getting a lot of traction in this. There are definitely these areas where people are creating, oh, these are what we consider standards for
yeah,
this.
yeah,
I think it's still early in the game,
right.
and there's obviously, I think, a lot of refinement that
Mm.
needs to happen in this place, but we're definitely there. And even at a broader global scale, you've got each countries now trying to produce their safety standards around these things.
Oh,
You've got the EU with their sort of safety standards. The
yeah.
US has created a set of safety standards around, hey, how should we treat AI overall? How do we think about AI on our government systems and what types of systems? Where should we use it versus not use it? There's definitely a lot of thought that's going into this right now.
Interesting. And to the threats that you called out with prompt injection and having the permission mapped out correctly, like a lot of people speak this in terms of control plane. What's my control plane? What's my data plane? That's how most of us security people want to know. What is it that I have available that I can use to control and see the data flow in the work? Is there like that concept in your mind? Have you figured that out for an LLM system?
So I think there's like a couple of things. There's your deployment of an LLM, which again, 98% of it, 95% of it, I'm just going to say 5%,
Yeah.
95% of it is just standard infrastructure stuff.
Yeah. Like ML
It's
ops, is that what people mean by that
Yeah,
when people
ML
say
ops. Yeah, ML
right?
ops. That's 95% just standard infrastructure controls, same stuff that we deal with every single day. And if you're talking about just the LLM itself, like just the technology itself, just the model and running it at runtime versus training it or having it stored on disk, these are probably this is the 5%.
Okay.
Okay. The LLM itself, when you actually pass data to an actual LLM and get data back from an LLM, are you talking about control and data flow there?
Oh, okay. So to your point, there's almost two layers to it. One is, and where are you starting? It becomes a question whether do you what you said. If you're using a third party service, then you're probably looking at the LLM side for what my control plane and data plane is. But if you're building your own, you're probably looking at that ML ops side first, and then going on to the other side, and maybe looking at both. Would that be
Yeah,
right?
from a management perspective, you would say the control plane for, let's say you're using Bedrock or you're using OpenAI's enterprise service, then there is some management interface, right? Or
Yeah,
some sort
yeah,
of control plane around the infrastructure and the way that the model, the configuration of the model, that then becomes the control plane.
yeah.
And of course, the data plane is just the direct data you're sending to and from that infrastructure. But if you break it down all the way down to the actual LLM technology itself, and you talk about control plane and data plane, actually, that is where prompt injection becomes a discussion.
And I think maybe to throw another layer into this with OpenAI now doing images and voice and everything as well. When people started talking about this, and obviously we referred some threads as prompt injection, data permission, I would say not everyone has an LLM ready at this point in time. Some people are still trying to figure this out. Some people are looking at what Bedrock would look like. In terms of how people approach this at the moment, I feel it's still very much in the beginning stage of I'm going to put like a user acceptable policy out there, and that should be enough coverage for me to feel that, hey, Caleb, you're employee workforce number 1234. Because you signed the agreement, you should not be using insert the LLM model, OpenAI or HeyGen or whatever else that's out there to clone the voice of our CEO to making something nefarious. Like, where is it? I feel most people are there, and I don't know if that's what you're saying as well. I feel most conversations I'm having is around that part, right? Because I've never spoke about a firewall for voice-based things or image-based things. I don't know how to put that control
Oh,
in.
yeah. First and foremost, you're going to find, and probably what you are finding is most people haven't deployed an LM at all in
Yeah,
production, right?
yeah,
And actually, I think the primary reason for that is because nobody knows what the hell to do with it. Like, I feel like everyone is basically saying, and this is like bar none, what I hear across the board is, hey, do AI. If we don't do AI, then we're not going to. And I'm going to be very blunt here. From what I hear, it's the executive and the board problem. They are
yeah, yeah,
causing this problem. They're basically saying we've got to do something with AI, go figure it out.
yeah,
And that is not the right move. We're basically saying, hey, I'm going to take a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Like I'm just
yeah,
going to throw AI in everything, even if it doesn't make any damn sense.
yeah.
And so what's going to happen is you're going to hit this trough of disillusionment from enterprises where they're going to be like, oh, AI is super overhyped because well, like it just doesn't do what we want it to do. And it's you don't even know what you want it to do. So of course it's not going to do that. Versus like very, very specific and pointed and saying, hey, where does it make sense to use this technology at the stage that it is? You can't create chatbots for everything. It makes no damn sense. If
Yeah.
you are a customer support company, it makes a ton of sense,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I feel like everyone is just saying, oh, just shove a chatbot or summarize some reports. And it's not used in a very good way. And so I think that's the first problem.
Yeah.
And that also creates the secondary issue of LM firewalls aren't anywhere because there are no LLMs anywhere. I feel that's the secondary problem. But I also feel like, and I've said this before, I feel like a lot of these technologies are just going to start being baked in or resolved by the providers themselves, right? I think foundational models, Anthropic and OpenAI and Microsoft, Google, they're just going to build in, prompt injection protections by default. Like
Yeah.
these things are getting really hard. I remember reading just recently in a group where Anthropic, Claude is really hard to prompt inject. And actually, Pi, the personal assistant one,
Yeah. Yeah.
like there was this research paper that said nobody could prompt inject Pi. And there was like a lot of effort in doing it. And they showed all the different models of what they could, but Pi was just invulnerable to it. Like you're going to see these models over a period of time here. Like that thing is just going to start resolving, I think, over
Mm.
time. And it's just going to become extremely difficult. It's going to make it very high cost to probably do this. It doesn't mean it won't happen. It doesn't mean
Yeah. Yeah.
prompt
Yeah.
injection is still not a problem. And so then you start wondering, okay, what about LLM firewalls? Then it goes to why wouldn't AWS just offer this in their infrastructure, or Google, or anybody who is offering this, they'll just have this as
Yeah.
part of the standard infrastructure offering. I just think like overall, like that's where you're going to see this thing end up going.
Doesn't have. We'll end up having an LLM firewall eventually.
There's one thing that's clear, that you're going to have a way to be able to see the data going into your LLM and the data coming out of your LLM.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that is a
Yeah.
guaranteed.
That's
Whether you're logging that or whether it's a proxy or whatever that thing is, it's
yeah.
definitely got to be there. And to your point, Ashish, earlier, like that has to be multimodal. So it's not just text. Now it's images,
Yeah.
right? It's
Voice.
voice and
Yeah.
audio. And
Yeah.
then in probably 3 months, it'll be full on video.
Yeah.
So like you're going to have streaming that you're going to have to figure out. And in this streaming broadcast between you and me, am I
Yeah.
prompt injecting you as I'm talking to you? Right? Like,
Yeah. Or even I think, for example, I would do this thing really fancy way as well. I would love to use one of those AI tools to translate what we are saying into another language. Like I might switch over to say something in Italian just to say that, hey, hello, I'm Ashish here. I like to speak Italian because I love to learn Italian. And you might switch over to go, oh, okay, hi, I'm Caleb. I love to speak French because for whatever reason, I wanted to learn French in my life.
yep,
And people would not even differentiate. They would just assume, oh, yeah, Caleb knows French. Ashish knows Italian.
that's
I,
right.
I think we're at that level already where if you put the two in between, it would be hard for someone to realize, hey, did something happen in between which was not real? And I think
Yep.
that's what, to your point about the multimodal thing, is at least I feel nervous because to your point about the video, and I know we're jumping into the what's hot section in a bit, but Adobe had their conference, I think it's called Max or something. Now they can do text to real-time transformation of videos, like walking video. Initially, we were like,
Yes,
oh,
yes.
green
Yeah, yeah,
screen,
yes, I
do
saw
whatever in
that.
the background.
Yeah, yeah,
Now they can
yeah,
do it like the person is walking with a coffee
yeah,
and they can change the latte art on as the person is walking, going, okay, that is
yeah. On the
next
fly,
level.
right?
Yeah,
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 on the fly. Like, I can
on
just
the
be like,
fly.
"Oh, I see Ashish is looking at me. I want him to wear a top hat now." Top
Yeah,
hat, boom.
that's right. I'm like, oh my God. I was like, that's the level we're talking. And I imagine doing that in live stream because it used to be a thing. And for people who just started live stream, they used to be like, hey, I want to put some sound effects in. I want to do this. Do you want to do that? Imagine just being able to change the entire location of the person in real time. But coming back to the whole security thing, where does that leave? Because I don't think that's a threat. I just feel it's like the nuance of it would be in the, say, like the what I mentioned about the fact that, hey, if I just use that technology to make an nefarious video of the CEO in their voice, because there's enough content about them on the internet that can just pick that up and, I don't know, for whatever reason, make a political statement or something about it and walk away from it because I just hate the person.
Yeah.
That's like the threat that I don't know is the one we are probably facing instead of data and everything else.
Like, the threat becomes, I was just having a conversation, it's the new pen testers become the social engineers. It's about human psychology,
Mhm.
and it is prompt injection, but it's just like what you would do with any other person. It's about influence and manipulation. In fact, there's a paper that was talking about how they showed that you get 120% more effective results if in your question to your LLM, you add emotion to it. So the example they gave was like, "Hey, can you calculate this thing for me?" But then if you say, "Hey, can you calculate this thing for me? It's the most important thing I can do to keep my job," it will get a way better and more comprehensive answer.
Oh my God. I'm all for trying different things and seeing where the way we can go. Because I mentioned the thing about the Italian thing. I want to learn Italian, but I don't know if I have enough time in my life to keep Italian and do all the job and do everything else as well. But being able to have that avatar of myself online who speaks Italian has an, I don't know, an Italian YouTube channel or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
That would be freaking cool. Like
yeah.
that
Well,
is exciting.
it's definitely going to the point where instant on the fly translation in your own voice should be very doable.
Yeah.
I can talk to you and you're going to hear English, but I may only know Chinese, but it'll be my voice, right, doing it. And you may speak to me and I'll hear it in Chinese and it'll
Yeah.
be your voice in Chinese and it'll be like having a normal conversation. You wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah.
Like
Actually,
it
you know what would be
feels
fun?
doable.
What would be fun? We should just record. We've already had 2 episodes. We can translate the entire episode into, I don't know, Spanish or any of the other ones and see if people pick a difference between if it's actually us speaking versus us, like the entire thing is just, oh,
Hey,
these are just native Spanish speakers.
we should just translate in 30 different languages.
Oh,
Do it at scale. If you're gonna
yeah,
do
yeah,
it, do it
basically.
at
Well,
scale.
that's
Yeah,
doable now, right? It's
yeah,
not that. I think I
yeah,
was
it's not I
watching
don't think it's that hard.
something that now the translation also does enunciations. It also adds enunciations
Yeah.
as well to the translation. Lip syncing is a good thing. It does the lips. I did a video the other day where I had to read something, and the entire time on the camera, you could see me looking down on the script. And I just used there was an app that I used, and it somehow raised my eyes up. And I'm like, I just was freaked me out because if they were my eyes,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I know the real video does not have me looking at the.
Yeah, you're talking about HeyGen, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
god, that
yeah.
thing is scary, but also at the same
Yeah.
time freaking amazing.
It is
That
amazing.
it also had the zoom effect. So for me, I'm a very emotional person. So when I'm speaking, there would be points where I would raise my voice, lower my voice, and every point that I raise my voice, it'll be a zoom in on my face and zoom
Did you
out. And like, oh,
did you do the paid version or just the free?
I think I did the paid version. I think we had
Okay.
the paid version to it.
I only have the free, so I only did the sort of cheap quality one, and it still blew my mind. So I wanna do the paid one. I should do the paid one.
What's hot, kind of where we are now. So I just shared what's hot, for, at least in AI for me. What's been hot for you, man, in this week?
Mine is and I haven't gotten around to doing this week has been so busy, but I'm hoping to do this by next week is AutoGen. So for
Oh,
me, it's playing around with Microsoft AutoGen. I want to create a team of people. So I want to create a person who is going to do discovery.
yeah.
So what they do is monitor and watch LinkedIn for different profiles based on a certain company. So
Okay.
for example, pick like Microsoft and
Yeah.
I just want them to say anytime a new Microsoft employee is joined, or if you see someone who is 3 months on the job or 6 months or less, to go identify that person and then do some OS int on that individual
Oh,
on the internet. And then when they find someone that matches a certain set of parameters, I want them to pass it off to another person who is going to analyze their context and text and then create and draft a phishing email that basically is believable on them asking basically, can I get your password or your login information? And so basically very much a spear phishing email. And then what I want to do is I want to have the person doing the discovery and I want the person generating and writing the right emails and then the person who will actually go and execute and send it and then correspond with the user. And so I want to use this is my first use case for AutoGen, which is create these three people and then have them obviously communicate and pass that information along and go do it. And I'm obviously not literally going to send the people a phishing
oh no,
email,
because you could have a
but
fake profile that just says that it's joined Microsoft on LinkedIn, like with a
yeah,
fake.
but I want to see how good it gets and how the interaction of these people work. So that's the thing I want to
Would you
go
want
do.
any listeners who are interested in becoming, I won't say lab rat, but want to participate in the experiment? Would you want any Microsoft employees who are listening to this conversation and want to participate in the experiment to put their hands up?
Sure. And actually, if there's any junior or any engineers that wanna help do it too, I'm open for that as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, this just reminded me of something I did want to add to the what's hot thing as well. I don't know if you saw the copyright indemnity that Microsoft and Google came out with for
No.
content. So I think it was like Phil Manables, who's been on the Cloud Security podcast. He's a CISO for Google Cloud. They spoke about that if you, as a content creator, are challenged for on any copyright ground, they were going to take responsibility for any potential risk that is involved in that whole. Basically, saying if someone sues you for the fact that the data that has been consumed is theirs and you can't use this on content creator, whatever, Microsoft and Google both basically came out and said that they're going to cover the legal costs for it.
Wait, okay, so if I'm using Google or Microsoft to create content and then someone takes that content and then tries to wait, I'm confused. They're suing
It's like
me?
I think it says so. I'm gonna read quote like there's a quote from the Google spokesman, which is we're offering a protection against allegations that both the training and output of AI
Oh,
systems.
if the LLMs produce it.
That's
That's
right.
that's
Yeah.
that's what you're saying. Yes, under yep, got it. Yep.
So that this means that they may not so the Google lawyers may not rush to the rescue if users ask, "Do you want AI to copy work of a specific author?" But it will review all relevant information with the customer for every copyright allegation as well, obviously, as expected.
Yeah.
Same with
Yeah.
Microsoft.
Yeah, this copyright thing, I'm sorry, but I feel like there's a huge amount of noise here that will probably I feel like this is we're inhibiting a lot of progression here.
With
Um,
copyright.
yeah, it's really amazing. Like all of a sudden, you've got people like Google and others, and oh, you can't touch this content on the internet. You can't touch that content on the internet. And you know what it's doing is it's delaying our capability of creating good, smart technology in our LLMs. And to me, that's a threat because when I think about other nation states don't abide by any of this. And what they're going to do is they're going to move way faster because they don't care about any of these laws or the fact that you can't scrape or crawl rub. They're just going to do it anyways. And they're going to create much smarter models and they're going to be ahead in terms of that innovation, right?
It's funny you say that because so Google did specific new AI announcements just for a country like India, where I know for sure this is definitely not something people consider as highly important. Copyright is not like the most important thing in everyone's day-to-day life.
Yeah.
They are making specific AI announcements which are specific for the Indian audience. Because imagine a billion people trying to use a new AI system. So they're definitely already thinking like what you're saying. They've definitely gone. People who want to pick this up and run with it, they are going to do it anyways.
Yeah,
If
they are.
there's no point in you trying to stop that wave. So yeah, if you want to spend the time and try and do the copyright thing, I'm sure, like, I don't want to discredit people who are trying to seek validation for their work, but at the same time, where do you draw the line for, oh, is it really worth my time? So I'll leave that one there. I do want to add another section to this because the first episode we had a question, so I thought why not just kick it off as like a whole third section, which is the final section for the episode, just like a AI support thing, cybersecurity AI support. We'll come up with a better name, but there was a question from Feynman Young, and I hope I pronounced his name right. He asked a question around, as CISOs, what are the questions and mitigations related to LLMs you are considering adding to your vendor risk assessment? By the way, thanks for the question, Feynman. Any thoughts on this, Caleb?
Yeah, I think to be blunt, it's a great question. And obviously, I think the standard question that most people are adding in that scenario is please do not use our customer data as training data for any
Mhm.
internal models. There's a secondary to that, which is are you using, you as a third party, are you using any models in your organization at which you're passing our data into? And do you have similar pass through agreements that say your data is not going to be used for them as training data? I think fundamentally that's been really the only ask that I've seen that really makes some sense.
Yeah.
I think though we need a better way. Let me explain. It's one part of me says as a CISO, this makes sense. You want to protect your data. You want to make sure that your vendors have some contractual obligation to state that this data is not going to be thrown into a model and then be able to be used in someplace else that you have no advantage on. The other part of me also says if we continue going down this road, we're not going to evolve and we're not going to get better
Mhm.
because actually having the ability to use data and interactions in what we do builds better features, builds better capabilities, allows us to advance our technology in a way that's better for everybody. I think the challenge is how do we ensure that the data that we interact with vendors and customers is safe data and is not data that we would consider to be sensitive. That's really the distinction, right? Which is it's not, hey, don't use any of my data for training data. It's don't use any of my sensitive data for training data. And so I think there's got to be a better way to where we have an ability for LLMs and training and models and data to ensure validation of sensitive data. For example, I might be persuaded as a CISO if the vendor showed me the way at which their data pipelines were built and the
Mhm.
way that they removed, redacted, confiscated, or said how they titled, tagged, flagged sensitive data and said everything else, none of that information would ever get in. but everything else is okay. Then I might be persuaded to say, hey, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So I think there might be some questions around moving forward ahead in the future around data pipelines, how
Mhm.
people clean and cleanse that data and what does it look like? Because I do think we need to make a difference between data and sensitive data. And I don't want to like start painting everything with a broad brush.
Yeah. I think maybe there's another thing to be said about as a CISO, the existing contracts people may have been running for a while, where a lot of times we don't even ask questions around what's going to happen to my data, apart from the fact that if we ever break the contract, please make sure the odd data is deleted. If that data is actually put into an LLM system, there is no guarantee for deletion of data because it's
Well,
already in there. So
uh,
I imagine, what does that mean for to what the question was around, like the whole, what threats am I worried about? I definitely feel what Feynman is also calling out is the fact that it looks like he's a cybersecurity founder for Gen AI as well. So he's coming from that lens for what else should a vendor look out for that they can use to give confidence to a CISO to feel that, hey, yes, it's okay for me to pass my data. So
yeah,
to what he
yeah.
said,
So,
masking out the data,
it-
obviously having SOC 1, SOC 2, because I think the first part is still ML ops to what he was saying, 95% of it. So maybe that might give some confidence.
zero retention of data.
Zero retention, okay. And zero data retention or
Yeah, zero data retention. So anything I send to you after you've processed it, it's tossed or only stored in memory. So that could be a nice confident. The other thing that I think vendors specifically can do, especially if you're building products, is any data that goes to you is visibly stored in a place of infrastructure that has control from the enterprise. Right. So for example, let's say, oh, we want all these logs and analytics from our product. Hey,
yeah,
I totally get it. I understand why you need that. And by the way, it should build a better feature set for me as a customer in the future.
yeah,
My only ask is dump all those logs in an S3 bucket for me. And before you parse it out and send it to your cloud. And if you do that, I not only get visibility of the data going to you, but I also get control of that data that goes to you. If I so choose, I can zero that out constantly all day long if I want, or I can just let it live, or I can look at it with my own controls around what PII or sensitive data might be going in there. That gives me a lot of high confidence. Then I don't care much about what you do on your back end, as
mhm,
long as I know that the things are going out from my product to you are this, and
mhm.
this is where it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think definitely that would help. Hopefully that answers the question. By the way, anyone who's listening in or watching, if you have any more questions, feel free to drop that in. I think we'll try including the support session so we can actually answer some of these questions that are coming in. So that was the end of this particular show. It makes me feel like, what do we talk about in the next one, man? Like
Like we got a little off track of up on
with the
our
Hey Gen
initial
AI.
agenda, right? It's going a little bit in like different directions versus learning about LLMs and the
This
AI
is an
stuff.
evolving podcast. This is totally an evolving podcast.
Maybe what we do next time is pick one attack, talk about the attack, the solutions to the attack, the
Yeah,
current things around the attack, and then we'll leave the rest. We've done the basics. We could just
perfect.
now we can talk about the attacks that are coming. We could talk about maybe even one we pick one about what are the cool companies that are doing cool things with AI right
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Like
I think,
like
and also, by the way, I'm happy to put this in the podcast thing. And if anyone has a suggestion of what else we should be covering, feel free to
yeah.
put that in as well. Just send that to us as well.
What about even bringing guests on? Should we do that?
Yeah,
Should we
you
do
can
a
do that
couple
as well. I
people?
think I've got a few people who reached out for that as well. So definitely you can do that as well. Because I've got a few people who reached out who wanted to be guests already without even listening to the episode. So I think let's just get the episode out, what we're talking about, before we bring
We
you
don't
on.
even know if anyone listens to this stuff. So I don't know why you want to be on a podcast that nobody listens to yet. So
Yeah, like I think it's gonna be my parents listening to this in back in Australia. But that's the
yeah,
episode. For folks who are listening in, feel free to follow us
this is time
on.
for just you and I just to screw around.
Basically, that's pretty much
Go
what we're
ahead.
doing. Yeah, cool.
Go
All right,
ahead.
I'm gonna end the podcast over there, but I appreciate everyone who listened. If you want to follow us and maybe leave a review or rating on iTunes or Spotify, do that as well. Otherwise, you can follow us on YouTube. Thanks for listening. All right, talk to you in the next episode.